Good morning. Hey, it's great to worship together again. Man, that prayer was beautiful and powerful, wasn't it? If we're going to be a people who are bringing the kingdom wherever we go, that means if the kingdom comes to Yakima, there is no more violence, right? So how are you and I called to do that wherever we go? How are we to be peacemakers and comforters and to be with those who mourn, maybe even wherever we go? I think sometimes as we're talking about these wilderness seasons, that maybe it's possible sometimes an entire city can be in a wilderness season, right? So how will we be people who help guide others through the wilderness? That moves us into today as we continue on talking about wilderness. Now, if you and I have talked more than a couple times, I've probably talked a little bit about wrestling, because I was a wrestler for a long time, and we always live in the glory days. Side note, every sport I ever did involved a lot of spandex, so you're welcome for that mental image. We have healing prayer following every service. You can get that out, but yeah, so I wrestled for about 7 years. I started when I was officially started when I was in the third grade, unofficially in second grade because I had connections. And it was a lot of fun. I was actually pretty decent. And there were a lot of things that I actually really liked about wrestling. The first thing I liked about wrestling was, and probably the main thing that I liked about wrestling, was that in the moment of competition, it was just me and one other person. Yeah, there was a coach, which most of the time was my dad, off in the corner, and there was a team that was cheering for you. There were bleachers. At least in our town, wrestling was a big deal, so the bleachers were filled, and that was good. But you didn't really realize all of that. It was just you and one other person, and you had to beat that other person. And so if I won, I felt like that victory was mine. Like if I won, it was because I earned it. And if I lost, it was because I wasn't good enough. Or maybe I had made a mistake that I could learn from and I could get better. Either way, the win or the loss was on me. Yeah, I mean, there was a team that we trained with. And in as far as that goes, like we were there for one another, we helped each other get better. But in the moment of competition, your team could not help you, right? That would be a little bit weird if you started losing and so your whole team cleared the bench and was like, oh, well, this is not good. Like, get off of him. He's supposed to win this match. That's just not how it works. It's you and it's one other person. And it's fierce. I liked that challenge. So if I won, it was because I had worked hard for it. And if I lost, it was because I needed to work on something or I needed to tighten something else. Now, here's the other part of it that I liked that I guess I didn't realize in the moment was that I liked that all the attention was just on me. Like for just a little while, nobody was concerned about any of the other competitors. There were just two people on the mat, and like that's where the focus was at. I think at the end of it, what I really liked about wrestling was that it was all about me. Especially on my team, because like I was pretty good. And so everybody talked about me on the team, like I was the good one. I think the truth is that I struggle with a little bit of a me mentality. And I didn't realize that's what I really liked about wrestling, was that it actually was all about me. If I won, it was about me. If I lost, it was about me. If people showed up, it was to watch me, and I liked that. And I think if we're all honest, there's some little aspect of our lives, there's some aspect of our heart where we like things being about us. It's so easy for us to put me in the center of the story. One way or another, for one reason or another, we find a way to put ourselves in the center of the story. Now, this mentality, this me-centric mentality, it's nothing new. It's been age old. In fact, there was a time when we believed that the entire universe, the entire cosmos, revolved around the earth. It wasn't until just before 1514 when Copernicus wrote a letter publicly challenging this geocentric view of the world where everything revolved around the earth. He writes this public letter and takes on the mainstream thought publicly. And this was a big deal. Now, there had been some chatter about maybe the earth isn't the center of the world. That had been going around here or there, but it wasn't really challenged in a very real way until Copernicus. And then sometime later, we have in 1633, Galileo, who was a proponent and follower of Copernicus, again picked up the thought. And from that time, it still really hadn't gone away. This geocentric understanding hadn't really gone away. And it was still such a big deal that when Galileo, who was a member of the Catholic Church, challenged this mainstream mentality, that he was actually excommunicated from the church and he was labeled a heretic. Labeled a heretic for suggesting that maybe the sun is the center of the revolution of the earth. We don't know what else revolves around that, but we know that it at least seems reasonable that we might be revolving around the sun instead of the sun revolving around us. Now, why on earth would Galileo be labeled a heretic? Pride. We could not fathom that anything other than me is the center of our universe. Because from my perspective, it actually does look like the world and the cosmos maybe wraps around me instead of me wrapping around something else. And this mentality has not been lost. It's picked up in different ways throughout time. In fact, I want to see if you guys can finish this statement for me. This is really truly an all play. Ready? When the going gets tough, nailed it. Do you know what that understanding of everything means? It means that anything that is good in your life is the result of you doing it. That if there's a hard time in your life, you will be the one to overcome. It's when things are difficult, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and you get going. In fact, journalist Ed Yong, in describing this mentality within our culture, says it this way: from its founding, the United States has cultivated a national mythos around the capacity of individuals to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, ostensibly by their own merits. What Young is saying is that this is our way of understanding, that you and I are at the center of this cultural narrative, that when things are tough, you and I have to be enough, and if you aren't, you don't deserve anything. You don't deserve anything good. You only deserve punishment. That's the whole understanding of merit, that if you're good enough, you get what you deserve, and if you're not good enough, you get what you deserve. This puts so much emphasis on me that there's no room for anything else. It's the believe in yourself mentality. Now, the problem is, with a me-centric mentality, with a believe in yourself, you can become enough, you can manifest your own destiny kind of mentality, is this: when you find yourself in the wilderness, you will die with that mentality. 100% of the time, you will die if getting through the wilderness is all about you. If you are the center of your own story, when the wilderness comes, you will not make it out alive. That's a guarantee. Author Candace Simmons comments on the wilderness saying this: the wilderness is simply a place in life that you don't want to be. Pretty understandable. But it's the place where the God of glory meets with the barren soul, showing us the deepest lessons of our life. It's the place where the God of glory meets with the barren soul, showing us the deepest lessons of life. Simmons' quote says two things to us. First, in order to get through the wilderness, we have to learn the lesson the deepest lessons of the wilderness. That's what the wilderness is there for, is to teach us a lesson. And then secondly, we cannot learn that lesson unless we understand the depth and limitations of our own brokenness. God's fullness of grace cannot meet you and me until we understand the fullness of our own limitations and brokenness. Until you and I understand that we can't make it through the wilderness on our own merit, we will never learn the lesson from the wilderness. You see, the wilderness is also, however, helpful to combat that understanding, that me-centric, I can do it by myself, pull myself up by the bootstraps understanding. In fact, we're going to see this again in the life of Israel. If you have your Bible, you can turn to Numbers chapter 13. We've been reading around this part of the story this month, starting last week. We saw a couple of the things that Israel kind of missed out on doing, or didn't see, they couldn't see from their perspective because of where they were. And now we're going to pick up that story once again, just before a little bit of what we read last week. So we're going to skip around just a little bit within Numbers chapter 13. If you don't have your Bible, it's okay. It will be on the screen. Start at verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. We're going to skip to verse 26. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is the fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities fortified and are very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan." Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." All right, so what we have is Israel has wandered for some time in the wilderness. They've come out of Egypt. They've been wandering through the wilderness. They've met with the Lord on Mount Sinai, and now they find themselves at the edge of the promised land. They are about to head into Canaan, which is the land God says here in verse 1 that he is giving to the Israelites. So the Lord commands Moses to put together a group of spies and to go and scope out the land. Now, the people that we see that we didn't read about here from verse 4 through 25 are leaders of each tribe. These are not just regular people. These are not untested and untried people. These are the leaders of each clan. There are 12 in total, 12 tribes of Israel. And so the leader of each tribe is sent out as a group into the land of Canaan, and they are commanded to retrieve specific amounts of information. So they're instructed to learn about what the land looks like, what kind of produce is it actually everything we had hoped for, how are the people living in it, what do they look like, it gathers some information about the people. And so that's everything that happens. We even find that Israel brings back, or the group of spies from Israel brings back some of the produce from the land. And this produce is so big that one of the clusters of grapes has to be carried on a pole between two people. Now, we live in a very agricultural area. I grew up in a grape farming town, and I had to walk through the vineyards to get to the high school every single day. I never encountered a cluster of grapes that had to be carried between a pole or on a pole between two people. It just didn't happen. You know, we'd take one or two off and we'd pop it in and we'd just head up to school. And then on the way back, we'd, grab a couple more and couldn't take too many because you'd get in trouble. So never in my life did I ever encounter one cluster of grapes that needed to be carried on a pole between two people. Yet that's what we see here in this land. It's a plentiful land. It's everything that if Israel were picking out their own real estate, like that would be the dream property. Let's go get that one. This one is perfect for a people that have to grow everything that they eat. Like this is it. So they do all of that. They gather all of the intel that they were sent out to collect. They find out about the land. They find out about the people in the land. And then they come back as good spies sent out on a mission, and they report to the people. Now, you would think that after everything that had happened, they would be like, hey, here's the land. It is excellent. It's ours. Let's go. Right? Because if God tells you to take the land, you go and take the land. That's not, however, the report that we get. So they come back from the land, from Canaan, and they say, yeah, you know what? The land you sent us into, it's everything you said plus more. That's what milk and honey, a land flowing with milk and honey, that's a euphemism for, like, this is really, really good land. Like, this is everything we could possibly dream of. However, you also sent us out to check on the people. The people situation, not as good, right? So we have... there are people who are living in the land that are powerful. And the cities are fortified and very large. Now, Israel at this point is hearing this message and they're like, we just left powerful people not super long ago. Like the Egyptians, do you remember that? Now we're going back. What are we going to be enslaved again? Like this is ridiculous. It seems like we're just going from bad to worse now. What is going on? The people are powerful, and then the cities are fortified. They're very large. Probably had thick, tall walls built around them. Scholars, as they look at the list of the peoples that are listed off here, from verses 28 and 29. It's a group of people that, yes, some built cities, some were nomadic, some had other skills. They were all known for something. These were very skilled people, and they were used to being in the land. They knew how to navigate it. They knew where the strategic points were, and if Israel were going to go in and battle against them, Israel doesn't know any of that, not to mention the fact they are not even skilled in battle at all. Like they've had small brushes with battle, but outside of that, they are not prepared for what's going to happen in the promised land, in the land of Canaan, with all of these skilled people, not to mention fortified cities. And on top of that, even if they had decided that they were going to build siege walls and siege ramps so that they could starve out the people and maybe take the long route to victory, they give this report. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. Now, if you skip down to verse 33, you realize something about these descendants, that they were believed to be from the Nephilim, which is really kind of a weird language because the last time that we hear about the Nephilim, it's pre-flood. It's believed that the Nephilim were like the offspring of fallen angels or gods and men, and they were like men of renown. Think of like Hercules in mythology, right? That kind of person. Think of Goliath, only a whole city of Goliaths. These are massive people that are powerful and built for war. Now, what Israel forgets is that even in their own story, even in their own origin, that the flood has already happened and the descendants of the Nephilim have been wiped out. Yet they still, in the midst of it, look at the size and they're like, these must be gods. These must be gods. They are far beyond anything. Even if we could do the siege wall, even if we could build ramps against these fortified cities, there's gods in the land. What are we doing? Like, are we just going to die? And then it's so bad that all but one spy gives the report that, you know what? This is something we cannot do. We can't do this. It's only Caleb that says, no, we can do it. We can go into the land and we can take it. The rest of the people say, no, we cannot do this. Do you want to know what the ironic part is? The majority of that group not Caleb, is actually correct. They're correct. They cannot beat them. And they've proven it. They've proven it. If you look at the language from verse 31 to 33, it's, we can't attack those people. We explored the land. It devours everything. We saw the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers. Do you see this? They have put themselves in the center of the story. And with themselves at the center of the story, they will most assuredly die in the wilderness. When they put them at Israel puts themselves at the center of the story, they're absolutely 100% correct. They cannot win. They can't do it. But what Israel forgot is a list of miracles. A list of miracles. So if we trace back through everything that Israel has forgotten, after the miraculous release of Israel from Egypt, right? So God sends the plagues, and Israel sees in the plagues the power of God manifest against the people of Egypt. But even after that, we see in Exodus 13 and 14, we see an angel of God and a pillar of cloud and smoke that guards and leads and guides the people of Israel, right? So miraculous thing. This is God encountering his people miraculously. There's no doubt about it. Israel saw it, every single one. And then following that, in Exodus 14, Israel witnesses God with a strong wind making a path through the sea. That Israel walked through on dry land where it should have been wet. And after that, the armies of Egypt followed in, an army that Israel could not possibly win against. Otherwise, they would have done it a while ago. They couldn't have possibly beaten Egypt. They were not skilled for war. They had been oppressed for centuries. They were not prepared for the battle, so they ran, and God defeats them using that same sea when the Egyptians' chariot wheels were made to swerve and the army was drowned. And then in Exodus 15, as we read last week, Israel comes 3 days into their journey and they're thirsty, and the only water that they can find is unfit for drinking. But God makes the bitter water sweet and drinkable. In Exodus 16, we see Israel is hungry and God rains down bread from heaven, and shortly after that, God sends birds to bring them meat. Exodus 17, they find themselves thirsty again and there's no water source, and God commands Moses to strike a rock and water flows out of the rock, right? This is not like, oh, the water was stopped up and there was a spring underneath it. No, water flowed where water was not found, out of a rock. In Exodus 17, Israel finds itself against another army that they can't win against. Yet God uses this weird thing where as long as Moses' arms are raised, the battle is won. We know that they couldn't win the battle because every time Moses' arms go down, they start losing the battle. There's divine intervention in this battle. Exodus 19, all of Israel is gathered at the base of Mount Sinai, and there is smoke and fire on the mountain. Everything is shaking and quaking because the voice of God is resonating throughout the land, so much so that the Israelites hear it, recognize it as the voice of God, and say to Moses, "No, you go up. We are terrified. If we stay, we will die." God is too great and too powerful for us. We can't possibly stay in his presence. So Moses, you go up. You have the feast. We'll stay here. Then in Numbers 11, again, God brings meat through quail. So many quail that Israel can't possibly eat it all, and it just piles up. Miracle after miracle after miracle, and Israel misses the point. They forgot all about what God had already done. At the edge of the promised land, at the edge of Canaan where they were supposed to step in, they forgot that God was good for it. That if he had done it already, he would do it again. You see, the point that they were supposed to catch is this, that the spies are exactly right. That Israel could not win the battle in the wilderness, but God can. He showed it when he defeated Egypt. He showed it when he cured the water. He showed it when he made bread rain down from heaven. And every single miracle that we see, God showed his power to overcome the wilderness. So here's the truth. Israel could not win the battle in the wilderness, but God could. And they forgot. Why? Because once again, they had put themselves at the center of the story. And when we put ourselves at the center of the story, we miss the purpose of miracles. You see, miracles are not meant to entertain us. They're actually not meant for our own enjoyment. As Candace Simmons once again comments on this, she says, miracles are meant to do more than fascinate our soul. They're meant to convince us that God's faithfulness will not fail when the dry desert days come. You see, if God has intervened in your life in a miracle, it actually wasn't for your own enjoyment. That's certainly a part of it. That's a byproduct of it. Right? But Israel experienced each one of those miracles, and Israel enjoyed each one of those miracles. And at the end, the miracle wasn't enough because Israel still put themselves in the center of the story. And they missed the point of the miracles was not just to feed them, just to make it a little bit easier in the desert. The purpose of the miracles was to show God's power and faithfulness so that when they encountered the next crisis, when they encountered the next test, when they encountered the next battle, they would remember that though Israel cannot defeat in battle, God can. That's the whole purpose of it. I feel this in my own life in so many ways. I can't tell you how many times that Janine and I have seen, even just over the course of our marriage, where we've seen God intervene and we've seen him provide in ways that we were not expecting. When we felt led and we were supposed to give our grocery money away, I remember the next day a check, Janine coming out with tears in her eyes, waving a letter that had just come in the mail because we hadn't opened it up from the day before. It was a check for the exact amount that we had given away, and it said, here's the grocery money. Right? But we worried and we panicked. We were like, what are we going to do? I don't know. Let's do it anyway. I remember early on seeing friends who would do things that I just wasn't used to, like actually trusting God for things that we needed. I remember seeing a friend who posted on social media one day, I'm just praying for a new vehicle. Not because he wanted something new, not because he wanted something nice. It was because his old one stopped working and he had no money for a new one. So he started praying for it because he said, I don't have any way to produce this myself. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's genius. Actually trusting God for our regular needs. I think I could do that. So we had kind of committed to start praying for those things. And I remember we were in a very similar position as a starting out youth pastor, and we didn't have any money. And I was like, what would be really, really awesome is if we had a vehicle. That would just be swell. Something to get our family around, something that was reliable. And then one of my youth leaders called up and was like, hey, a friend said they wanted to sell their Suburban. And I remember you saying, like, that would be really cool. And so I told her that you couldn't afford it, but would she give it to you? And she said yes. I was like, yeah, I'm interested. That sounds like a good deal. Yeah, so cool, super cool. However, the next time we needed a vehicle, guess what? Janine and I were like, where are we going to get the money? We just don't have it. Or maybe it wasn't even a vehicle. Maybe it was you could just pick your battle in life, and we're like, oh no, what are we going to do? We had forgotten God had already done it. And if God had already done it, if he had already proven that he is faithful and good in the crisis, he's going to come through again. It doesn't mean he's always just going to give us a car. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is God is always faithful and will always give us what we need. He's shown us that he will do it. And when those dry desert days come, we have to look back at those things and remember that God has already done it, because it's going to be very easy to look at those things and be like, oh no. What are we going to do? I don't know where we're going to come up with the thing for that or get what we need, or I don't know how I'm going to be enough, or I don't know how I'm going to get enough. And God's looking back and kind of scratching his head like, didn't I already show you that I got this? Didn't I already show you that I'm good? Just look back. Look at the water out of the rock. Look at the bread raining down from heaven and realize this, that when those dry desert days come, that you and I can't win the battle in the wilderness. We can't win the battle in the wilderness, but God can. You and I cannot win the battle in the wilderness. The spies weren't wrong. There are giants in the land. There are fortified cities. There are things that are just way outside of our experience and ability to accomplish. But here's the thing. You and I are not at the center of the story. God is at the center of the story. And as long as you and I are at the center of the story, that battle can't be won. But when God is at the center of the story, God can win. It is true for every need. It is true for every relationship. It is true for every task. God can. It's good. It's good. All right, you clap. That's cool. Now, some of us have been stuck in the wilderness for a while, and it can feel like maybe God isn't there because it's been so long since the ravens came and brought meat, or the quail piled up around our feet. It's been so long since we've tasted the goodness of God, and it's been dry. But here's the reality. We have to hold on to the same truth that Israel had to hold on to. You see, Israel had already been given the answer to their problems before they set foot in the wilderness. Did you know that? Like before God ever did anything else, before he defined the wilderness testing for them, before he did anything good for Israel, he brings them to the edge of the wilderness. And in Exodus 14, he says this, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Israel had the answer before they ever set foot in there. Before they ever encountered a battle, before they ever came to the edge of Canaan, all of that time, God is like, I spoke already. I will fight for you. You need to be still. You get to the edge of Canaan, they start worrying. They forgot God will fight for us. And I think, even though we said the rest of the spies were right, they could not accomplish it, I think that's actually what Caleb was remembering. I think he was looking back and he was thinking, we can't win this battle, but on the other hand, maybe we can, because remember God said he'd fight for us? And then do you remember how he did all those other things? And do you remember how we already won a battle? But God can do it. Let's go in. That's the lesson from the wilderness. If we want to learn the lesson in the wilderness, this is the big one. You can't win if you are at the center of the story. You can't do it. You will die in the wilderness, but God can do it. Whatever that thing is, whatever that need is, and sometimes it doesn't look exactly the way we thought it would look like. Sometimes it's like bread raining down from heaven. Like that provision is not what we would have picked for ourselves. Sometimes it still looks like a fortified city, and yes, we still have to walk into it, but God is the one who will win the victory. He is the one that mends a broken heart. He is the one that fixes relationships. He's the one that supplies our every need. He is the one that gives us meaning and significance. He is the one that moves toward us first. What we have to do is we have to get out of the center of the story, because we'll miss every good thing that God does in our lives. Your job is to be still, because God will fight for you. That's what he'll do. I want to give us a couple really simple ways that we can remember this. First, in order to be still, in our stillness, we have to do something. First is we have to remember what God has already done. I want to ask you this week to look where and ask this question: where have you already seen God move? Because if God has done it before, he's going to do it again. And you need to hold on to those moments, because the wilderness gets really dry. The wilderness gets really depressing. The wilderness gets really, really hard. And you're going to have to look back and you're going to have to hold on to those moments, because you'll need it when God feels far. But God isn't far. Israel thought God was far from them, but in Exodus 33:14, he says, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Friends, if you can look back and you can be still in your stillness and look at what God has already done, you can realize, maybe you can recount the ways that God has been present with you so that you can understand that even in the hardships, God is still with you. He is still with you. And his ultimate goal is to lead you toward peace. And then secondly, don't rely on your own ability. That will kill you. Don't rely on your own ability. Instead, maybe this week, start reflecting on this question. And this is part of the hard work that hard internal work that we talked about last week. Maybe think about this question. What have you tried to rely on in your own ability to make it through the desert? Maybe where have you put yourself at the center of the story? Where have you put more emphasis on yourself, even in the midst of God's provision, than maybe you should have? Maybe I should have. These are the places of our hearts that reveal this self-reliance. We've learned to be self-reliant, but the goal, friends, is not self-reliance. The lesson of the wilderness is the exact opposite of self-reliance. The lesson of the wilderness is reliance on God, not reliance on self. So we have to identify those areas where we've put ourselves at the center of the story and where we've tried to make it through the wilderness on our own, and we've probably noticed that we trip up and we get scared of the fortified fortress. That's the point. You can't do it, but God can. So take yourself out of the center of the story, put God back in. His presence will go with you. He will lead you toward peace. He will lead you toward rest. And he will fight for you. I want to encourage you, if you are in the middle of a wilderness season, it's hard and that's okay. We want to be with you in the middle of the wilderness. See, when you find yourself battling that self-reliance, what I want to encourage you to do is bring that into community. Don't isolate it. Don't separate it. That's, again, just self-reliance saying, I've got this. I can figure it out. No, bring it into community. Let others bear that burden with you. Let them walk with you and love you through it. You can't receive somebody's love until you let yourself receive somebody's love. You can't receive God's grace and the lessons from the wilderness until you realize there's a need to receive God's grace and lessons from the wilderness. Seems pretty simple, right? That's hard work. If you are in the wilderness now, we want to be with you. We will help you carry that burden, and we will help you put it at the right place, at the feet of Jesus. The one who has always been with us, the one who will always be with us, the one that we can trust with everything. That community will help you point to truth, and that truth is a person, the person of Jesus. The only one who can truly win our battles for us. If you're in a place today where you have not yet learned how to trust Jesus, if you haven't put your trust into Jesus yet, I want to talk with you after the service. Like after we're done here, let's chat. Let's figure out how we can get you moving through the wilderness and put your trust in Jesus, the only one who can truly win those battles for you. Let's pray.